I'm really glad you're here tonight. This hour is different from the rest of the day. It doesn't ask you to decide anything. It doesn't ask you to perform or explain or keep up. It simply invites you to lie still and let your thoughts move at their own pace, like tides moving over ancient shores. As the years pass, nighttime becomes a kind of companion, a place where the mind is free to wander without interruption, where memories return, not urgently, but patiently, where understanding settles in quietly without needing words. Like shells deposited on a beach, one after another, year after year, building something substantial from countless small moments. Later in life, the mind doesn't race the way it once did. It reflects, it revisits, it connects dots that once seemed unrelated. And it does this most honestly when the lights are off and the world has gone silent. You understand now that life isn't built in grand gestures, but in accumulation, in the daily deposits of experience that, over decades, create the foundation of who you've become. This space is for those thoughts, the ones that don't surface during the day, the ones that arrive only when you're alone with yourself, resting, remembering, and gently making sense of a long, lived-in life. Tonight, we'll explore something ancient together, something about building, about layers, about how communities are made and unmade, about what endures when everything else washes away. So take a slow breath, let your body soften into the bed, and allow this night to meet you where you are. And now, before we begin, if this kind of honest, gentle reflection speaks to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And down in the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. There's something comforting about knowing we're all here together, scattered across time zones, but united in these late hours when the world finally grows still. So settle in, adjust your pillows, find a comfortable position, and know that for the next hour, you're not alone in whatever wisdom you're carrying, whatever understanding you've earned, whatever truths rise to the surface when the lights go out. Let's begin. You're lying in bed right now, and beneath you is your mattress. Beneath that, the bed frame. Beneath that, the floor. Beneath that, the foundation of your home. Beneath that, the earth. Layer upon layer upon layer. Everything you rest upon was built by accumulation, by time, by countless deposits, creating something solid enough to hold weight. This is how the Calusa people built their world. On the southwestern coast of Florida, centuries before anyone you ever knew was born, they built monuments from shells, oyster shells, conch shells, clam shells, the refuse of their meals, the remains of what sustained them. They didn't discard these shells carelessly. They placed them deliberately, one upon another, day after day, year after year, generation after generation. And slowly, gradually, impossibly, they built mountains from the sea, shell mounds rising from flat coastal landscapes, some 20 feet high, some 30, some covering acres of land, built entirely from shells, from the daily accumulation of living, from the simple act of eating and placing the remains in the same location over and over until something massive emerged from something small. You understand this now in ways you couldn't have understood when you were young. You understand accumulation. You understand how a life is built, how a person is made, not in dramatic moments, though those exist, but in the slow deposit of days, of choices, of experiences, of small decisions made again and again until they create the foundation of everything you are. You've been building your own mound for decades, since childhood, since you first began placing the shells of your experiences into the growing structure of your identity. You didn't realize you were doing it then. Children never do. They simply live. They simply place one day after another. But now, lying here in the darkness, you can see the shape of what you've built. The Calusa understood something profound about permanence and impermanence. They build their mounds from what others might have considered waste. The empty shells, the casings of consumed life, the remains of nourishment. They saw value in what was left behind. They recognized that even emptiness has weight, that even the discarded can become foundational. Your life is like this too, built not just from successes and proud moments, but from the shells of things that nourished you and then were gone. Relationships that ended, jobs that concluded, versions of yourself you outgrew and shed like shells. All of it matters. All of it contributes to the mound. Even the empty parts, even the hollow spaces, even what you thought was waste. You're resting now on everything you've accumulated, every experience underneath you like ancient shells compressed into something solid, supporting you, holding you up, allowing you to rest. The Calusa built their mounds over centuries, generation after generation, adding to what their ancestors began. They were fisher people, hunter-gatherers who never farmed, never planted crops, never domesticated animals. They took only what the water provided: oysters, clams, conchs, fish, turtles, the abundant life of the estuaries and coastal waters. And from this abundance, they built a civilization, complex, sophisticated, powerful enough to resist Spanish colonization for centuries, all without agriculture, all without following the path that other societies insisted was necessary for advancement. They found another way. They built their world from what the water gave them, from the daily harvest, from the faithful return to the same gathering places, from trust in abundance. You think about this now, about the resources you've drawn from throughout your life, the sources that nourished you, the places you return to again and again for sustenance. Not literal water, though maybe that too, but the wells you drew from, the relationships that fed you, the practices that sustained you, the beliefs that held you. You return to these sources daily, weekly, yearly, just as the Calusa returned to their oyster beds and fishing grounds. You harvested what you needed, you consumed what was offered, and you placed the shells of those experiences onto the growing mound of your life. Some of those sources are depleted now. The oyster beds of your youth are empty. The relationships that once fed you have ended. The beliefs that sustained you have been questioned or discarded. The practices that grounded you no longer fit. You've outlived some of your own sources of nourishment. This is natural. This is the way of long life. The Calusa knew this too. They knew when beds were over-harvested, when grounds needed to rest, when it was time to seek other waters. They adapted, they moved, they found new sources while remembering the old ones, while honoring what had fed them even after it could feed them no more. The shells remained, the mounds grew. The evidence of what had sustained them became the foundation of everything else. Nothing was truly lost. It was transformed, from nourishment to memory, from consumption to construction, from temporary sustenance to permanent monument. You carry this too. The shells of everything that fed you are still with you, still part of your foundation, still supporting you even though they're empty now. The job you had for 30 years, the marriage that ended, the friendships that faded, the dreams that died, all of it underneath you, all of it part of the mound, all of it essential to the structure that holds you now. The Calusa built their homes on top of these mounds. Their entire villages rose above the landscape on platforms of shell. They elevated themselves literally on the accumulation of their daily lives. They lived higher than the flood waters, higher than the storm surges, higher than the dangers of the low coastal plain. Their waste became their protection. Their discards became their elevation. What they consumed became what saved them from being consumed by the sea. You understand this metaphor in your bones. How many times have you been saved by your own accumulation? By the lessons learned from past mistakes? By the resilience built from past suffering? By the wisdom extracted from past failures? Your shells have elevated you too. Your accumulated experiences have lifted you above waters that would have drowned a younger, less experienced version of yourself. You've survived storms that would have destroyed you if you hadn't built your mound first, if you hadn't accumulated enough layers to stand on, enough height to keep your head above water. The shells of your failures protected you from later failures. The shells of your losses prepared you for later losses. The shells of your griefs made you strong enough to bear new griefs. This is the gift of age. This is the gift of accumulation. You're higher now than you've ever been, not despite your experiences, but because of them. Not despite the shells, but because of the shells. Every empty thing you've been through has added to your elevation, has lifted you one layer higher. The Calusa built communally. These mounds weren't the work of individuals. They were collective constructions, entire communities depositing their shells in the same locations, adding to the same piles, building together over lifetimes, over generations. No single person built a mound, but over time, the community built monuments. Your life is like this too, isn't it? You didn't build yourself alone. You're not self-made. No matter what the culture tells you about individualism, you're community-made, family-made, friend-made. You've been adding your shells to piles that others started. You've been building on foundations others laid. You've been elevated by the accumulated efforts of everyone who came before you and everyone who walked beside you. Your parents added shells to your mound. Your teachers, your mentors, your friends, your lovers, your children, if you had them, your colleagues, your community, even strangers who showed you kindness once. Everyone who touched your life added something to the pile, deposited something that lifted you higher. and you've added to their mounds too. Every kindness you offered, every meal you shared, every hand you held, every student you taught, every child you raised, every person you loved. You gave them shells for their own mounds. You helped elevate them. You participated in the communal construction of multiple lives, not just your own. This is how societies are actually built, not by heroic individuals, but by communities patiently accumulating shared experiences, shared meals, shared resources, shared protection. The Calusa understood this. They built together. They elevated together. They survived together on mounds that no one person could have created alone. You're lying here now on your own mound, but you're not alone on it. Everyone who contributed to your elevation is here with you, in memory, in echo, in the very structure of who you've become. The shells they gave you are mixed with your own shells, indistinguishable now, all part of the same foundation, all essential to the whole. The Calusa mounds reveal layers when archaeologists excavate them. Distinct strata showing different time periods, different types of shells indicating changing food sources, different artifacts showing evolving technologies and trading patterns. The mounds are time made visible, history compressed into vertical space, stories written in shells and soil and ash. Your life has layers too. You can excavate your own history. You can identify strata marking different eras. The childhood layer, the adolescent layer, the young adult layer, the middle-aged layer, each one distinct, each one showing different resources you consumed, different challenges you faced, different people you knew, different versions of yourself you were. If you dig through your memories, you find these layers. You can distinguish between decades, between phases, between the person you were at 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 and beyond. You can see how you changed, what you discarded, what you kept, what you transformed. The deepest layers are hardest to reach. The childhood memories compressed under decades of later experiences. But they're still there, still part of the foundation, still supporting everything above them. The shells from your earliest years are at the bottom of your mound, carrying the weight of everything that came after. You remember being small. You remember the sources that fed you then. Your mother's cooking if you were lucky. Your father's stories if he told them. Your grandmother's garden if she had one. The school lunches, the neighborhood store, the places that provided what you needed when you were too young to provide for yourself. Those sources seem distant now. They belong to a different layer, a different stratum of your life. But they're still there, still underneath you, still part of the foundation. The earliest shells still bearing weight. The Calusa placed more than shells on their mounds. They added earth, ash from fires, broken pottery, tools. Eventually, they buried their dead within the mounds. The structures became sacred, became repositories not just for physical refuse, but for spiritual significance. The mounds held bodies, held ancestors, held the physical remains of the community itself. Your mound holds this too, not literally, but metaphorically. You carry your dead with you, parents, grandparents, friends, siblings, partners, Children, if you've experienced that particular devastation, they're buried within the mound of your memory. They're part of the structure now. Their presence still shaping the landscape of who you are. You think about them as you lie here. You can't help it. The night brings them back. Their faces, their voices, their particular ways of being in the world. They're gone from the physical world, but they remain in yours. Buried in your mound. Integrated into your foundation. Their shells mixed with yours. This is what grief becomes over time. Not the sharp pain of fresh loss, but the dull awareness that you're building on top of people you loved, that they're underneath everything now, that you've risen higher in your own life, while they've remained at the level they died at, fixed in your memory at whatever age they were when they left. You're older now than some of them were when they died. You've outlived parts of your own foundation. You've exceeded some of the people who helped build you. This is strange, disorienting. You're standing on shells that include shells from people who never got as high as you've gotten. But this is how mounds work. The earlier deposits don't rise with the later ones. They stay where they were placed. They support what comes after, but they don't ascend with it. Your dead remain at their own level while you continue to rise, while you continue to add layers, while you continue to build higher and live longer and accumulate more shells than they could accumulate. The Calusa Mounds weren't just practical. They weren't just for elevation or protection. They were art. They were architecture. They were statements of culture and identity and power. The mounds could be seen from miles away. They announced presence. They declared permanence. They said, "We are here. We have been here. We will continue to be here." The largest mounds became ceremonial centers, places where the community gathered for important events, places of political power, places of spiritual significance. The simple accumulation of daily refuse had become monumental, had become meaningful beyond its original purpose, had transcended its humble origins to become something sacred. Your life has transcended too, hasn't it? What began as simple survival, as basic accumulation of days and experiences, as just trying to get by and figure things out, all of that simple living has become something more significant than you realized it would be. Your life has become a monument. Your accumulation has become meaningful. Your daily deposits have created something worth examining, worth preserving, worth passing on. You're living on a ceremonial mound now. The height you've achieved isn't just practical elevation above floods. It's a vantage point, a place of perspective, a location from which you can see further than you could see when you were lower, when you were younger, when fewer shells had accumulated. From this height, you can see your whole life. You can see the landscape of your experience spread out around you. You can see where you've been. You can see the paths you took. You can see the waters you fished from, the communities you built with, the storms you survived, the abundance you harvested. This perspective is earned. You couldn't have this view without climbing, without accumulating, without building layer by layer until you reach this height. Young people can't see what you see from here. They're still too low, still in the process of building, still depositing their earliest shells. They can't know yet what the shape of a whole life looks like, what the view is like from the top of decades of accumulation. But you know, you're here now. You've built high enough to see, and from this height, things look different. The things that seemed enormous when you were young look smaller now. The things that seemed catastrophic look manageable. The things that seemed permanent look temporary. The things that seemed important look trivial. And some things look more important than they seemed at the time. Small kindnesses you barely noticed. Quiet moments you didn't think to preserve. Ordinary days you lived without marking as special. From this height, from this accumulated perspective, you can see that those shells mattered too. Maybe mattered most. The ordinary shells, the daily deposits, the unremarkable accumulations that actually built the mound. The Calusa world ended, eventually, like all worlds end. Spanish colonization brought diseases, brought warfare, brought the slave trade. The population declined. The communities fragmented. The survivors were taken to Cuba as slaves, or fled to other regions, or died from European diseases. By the mid-17th century, the Calusa as a distinct people had disappeared from the historical record. But their mounds remained. Centuries after the last Calusa died, their monuments stood, visible, undeniable, evidence of a sophisticated culture that built something lasting from simple materials. The shells outlasted the people who placed them. The mounds outlasted the civilization that built them. The accumulation proved more permanent than the accumulator. You think about your own mortality as you lie here. You have to. At your age, you have to. Death isn't abstract anymore. It's not some distant, theoretical event. It's a reality you've brushed against. It's taken people you love. It's touched your own body with illness or injury or the simple degradation of aging. You know it's coming. You know your time for depositing shells is finite. This knowledge changes how you think about your mound, about what you're building, about what will remain after you're gone. You won't last forever, but will your mound last? Will the accumulation of your life remain visible after you're gone? Will future generations be able to look at what you built and understand that something significant happened here? That someone lived and loved and worked and contributed? Some of your shells will remain. The children you raised, if you raised them. The work you produced, if it was the kind that endures. The changes you made to the world, if you made visible ones. These shells will outlast you. They'll continue to be part of the landscape after you're gone. They'll be evidence that you were here, that you built something, that you mattered. But many of your shells won't remain. The private moments, the internal transformations, the struggles no one saw, the victories no one witnessed, the kindnesses no one recorded, the love you felt, the beauty you perceived, the meaning you made. These shells dissolve when you die. They're not permanent. They exist only in your experience, and when your experience ends, they end too. This is both sad and acceptable. The Calusa knew this. They built their mounds knowing they wouldn't live forever, knowing their individual contributions would be forgotten, knowing future generations wouldn't remember which specific shells they personally deposited. But they built anyway. They added to the mound anyway. They participated in the communal construction anyway, because the mound mattered even if individual contributions would be forgotten, because elevation mattered even if elevators would be unnamed, because building together mattered even if builders would eventually become anonymous shells within the structure they helped create. You're lying here tonight, adding one more shell to your mound. This day you just lived, this experience you just had, this breath you're taking right now, it's all being deposited onto the growing structure. You're still building, even now, even at this age, even this close to the end. You're still placing shells, still contributing to the accumulation, still making the mound higher and wider and more complex. The Calusa never stopped building. From birth to death, they contributed. Children placing their first small shells, elders placing their final ones. The work was never complete because life was never complete. As long as people lived and ate and gathered, the mounds grew. There was no finish line, no completion date, just the ongoing process of living and depositing and building. You understand this now. Your life isn't complete until it ends. You're not done building your mound. Every day adds something. Every experience contributes. Every interaction deposits a shell, even the quiet days, even the days that seem empty or wasted or meaningless. They add to the structure too. They create layers. They mark time. They prove you are here, living, continuing. Some days you add large shells, significant experiences, important events, days that feel heavy with meaning. You can feel these days landing on the mound with weight, with substance. They make a sound when they hit. They change the landscape visibly. These are the days you'll remember, the days that feel like they matter. Other days you add tiny shells, barely noticeable deposits, days that blur together, days you won't remember individually, days that feel like nothing happened. But even these matter. Even these contribute. The mound isn't built only from dramatic shells. It's built from countless ordinary ones. From the daily repetition of small deposits, from the accumulation of unremarkable moments that somehow, together, create remarkable height. You're learning to value the small shells. You didn't always. When you were young, you chased big shells, big experiences, big achievements, big moments. You wanted your life to be made of significant deposits, important contributions, memorable events. You wanted every shell to count, to matter, to be worth the space it occupied. But now you understand that the small shells are what actually build the mound. The ordinary days, the routine moments, the simple accumulation of waking and working and eating and resting. This is what created the foundation strong enough to support everything else. The big shells are visible. They catch the eye. But the small shells are structural. They're the majority. They're what actually holds everything up. The Calusa built their mounds in specific locations. They chose carefully. They placed their constructions at the mouths of rivers, at the edges of estuaries, at points where fresh water met salt water, where fish gathered, where oysters thrived, where resources were abundant and accessible. They built where life gathered, where nourishment was available, where the community could sustain itself. You've chosen locations too throughout your life, places to build, places to deposit your shells, places to create your mounds. Some choices were conscious. You decided to move to a certain city, to take a certain job, to join a certain community. You chose these locations deliberately. You recognized them as good places to build, places where resources were available, where you could sustain yourself, where your mound could grow. Other locations chose you. You ended up places without planning, without intention. Circumstances deposited you somewhere, and you stayed. You built there, not because you chose it, but because that's where you landed. And sometimes these unplanned locations became the most important building sites, the places where your mound grew tallest, the places where your most significant shells were deposited. You think about the places you've built, the physical locations, the houses, the apartments, the rooms where you slept and woke and lived. Each one holds part of your mound. Each one received deposits during a particular era. You can remember the bedroom in your childhood home, the dorm room in college, the first apartment, the houses you owned or rented or borrowed. Each one witnessed a layer of your mound being built. Some of these places still exist. You could return to them physically if you wanted. You could stand in those rooms and remember depositing shells there. Remember the version of yourself who lived there. Remember what you were building during that time. But even if the buildings are gone, demolished or destroyed or changed beyond recognition, the mounds you built there remain, in memory, in the structure of who you became. The locations are temporary, but the deposits are permanent parts of your foundation. The Calusa also built in metaphorical locations. They built within a cultural landscape, within a system of beliefs and practices and relationships. They built within a cosmology that saw the world in particular ways, that valued certain things, that organized life according to specific principles. This cultural location was as important as the physical one. It determined what shells they collected, how they placed them, why they built it all. You've built within cultural locations too. You were born into a particular time, a particular society, a particular set of beliefs about what matters, about what success looks like, about what a good life means. These cultural locations shaped your mound. They influenced which shells you valued, which experiences you sought, which accumulations you pursued. You didn't choose these cultural contexts any more than the Calusa chose theirs. You were born into them. You built within them, whether you agreed with them or not. And like the Calusa, you sometimes resisted your cultural location. You questioned the values you inherited. You challenged the assumptions you were taught. You rejected some shells that your culture insisted were valuable. You collected shells your culture ignored or dismissed. You built your mound according to your own sense of what mattered, not just according to what you were told should matter. This resistance cost you sometimes. Swimming against cultural currents is exhausting. Building differently than everyone around you is lonely. Valuing shells that others consider worthless is isolating. You've felt this. You've paid the price for building according to your own vision, rather than accepting the template your culture provided. But you've also felt the reward the satisfaction of a mound built honestly, according to your actual values rather than performed ones, according to your real experiences rather than curated ones, according to your genuine self rather than your acceptable self. Your mound is authentic. It's truly yours. Whatever else can be said about it, it represents your actual life, your real accumulation, your honest deposits. The Calusa Mounds are studied now by archaeologists. Scientists excavate them carefully. They sift through layers. They catalog shells. They identify species and count quantities and analyze patterns. They're trying to understand how the Calusa lived, what they ate, how they organized their society, what they believed, what they valued. The mounds are texts being read, stories being decoded, evidence being interpreted. Your mound will be studied too, in a way. After you're gone, people will excavate your life, not literally with tools and sifting screens, but through memory, through photographs, through stories, through the things you left behind. Your children, if you have them, will excavate your mound. They'll try to understand who you were, what mattered to you, why you made the choices you made, what your life meant. They'll find some shells easily, the obvious ones, the achievements, the visible contributions, the documented moments. These shells are right on the surface, easy to catalog, easy to understand, easy to explain to others. This is what they did. This is what they accomplished. This is what they were known for. But they'll struggle with other shells, the deeper layers, the private experiences, the internal transformations, the significance you placed on moments that left no external evidence. They'll excavate these with difficulty. They'll try to understand, but they won't have full context. They weren't there when you deposited these shells. They don't know why these particular experiences mattered to you. They can only guess, only interpret, only construct a version of your story from incomplete evidence. This is okay. This is how all excavation works. The Calusa can't explain their mounds to us. They're gone. We can only interpret based on what remains, based on patterns we observe, based on our best understanding of human behavior and cultural practice. We construct a story, we build a narrative, we create meaning from evidence. But we know we're missing context, missing the internal experience, missing the living voice that could say, "This is what I meant," or "This is why it mattered." Your excavators will miss context too. They'll construct their version of your life, their interpretation of your mound, their story about what you built and why. And their version won't be complete, won't be fully accurate, won't capture everything you actually experienced and felt and meant, but it will be their version. And that's what remains. Not your full experience, but the evidence you left behind and the interpretations others make of it. You're making peace with this. You have to. You can't control how you'll be remembered. You can't ensure accurate interpretation. You can't provide full context for every shell you've deposited. You can only build honestly while you're alive. Place your shells according to your own truth. Create a mound that represents your actual life, and then let go. Let others excavate as they will. Let them interpret. Let them construct their stories. Let them find what meaning they can in what you've left behind. The Calusa Mounds are threatened now. Development erodes them. Sea level rise floods them. Storms damage them. Time itself degrades them. Despite their impressive size and apparent permanence, they're vulnerable. They're slowly disappearing. Archaeologists race to study them before they're gone, to preserve what information they can, to document what remains before it's lost. Your mound is threatened too. Memory fades, bodies fail, minds deteriorate. The structure you've built so carefully is vulnerable to time, to erosion, to the simple fact that nothing physical lasts forever. You feel this vulnerability. You notice yourself forgetting, losing access to shells you know are there but can't quite reach anymore. Layers of your life becoming inaccessible even to you. Your own mound becoming archaeological to your own exploration. This is frightening sometimes, the idea that you might lose access to your own history, that the shells you place so carefully might become unreachable, that the layers of your life might separate from your consciousness even while you're still alive, that you might become an excavator of your own past, struggling to interpret evidence of experiences you actually lived but can no longer fully remember. But there's also something peaceful in it, a kind of natural erosion, a return to simplicity, the mound wearing down, the complexity reducing, the countless shells gradually weathering back towards sand. Maybe this is how it should end. Not with perfect preservation, but with gentle dissolution. Not with complete memory, but with soft forgetting. Not with the whole mound intact, but with slow return to the elements that made it. The Calusa understood cycles. They lived with water, with tides coming in and going out, with seasons changing, with abundance and scarcity alternating, with fish running and then not running, with storms building and then passing. Everything cycled. Nothing stayed the same. The mounds they built were permanent compared to individual lives, but temporary compared to geological time. Even stone eventually wears away. Even the most impressive construction eventually returns to earth. You're part of this cycle too. You've built your mound during your particular season, your particular tide, your particular moment in the endless cycling of time. You've made your contribution during your window of opportunity. You've deposited your shells during your lifetime. And now the tide is turning. The season is changing. Your building time is moving toward its end. This isn't failure. This is nature. This is the way of all things. The Calusa built for centuries and then stopped building because there were no more Calusa to build. Their civilization ended, but their mounds remained. Your building will stop too. Your deposits will end. Your accumulation will cease, but what you've built will remain, at least for a while, at least long enough to matter, at least long enough to stand as evidence that you were here, that you lived, that you built, that you contributed to the landscape. You're grateful now for the mound you've built, even with its flaws, even with shells you wish you hadn't deposited, even with layers you wish you could remove or redo or somehow improve. It's your mound. It's what you built with what you had, with the shells available to you, with the resources you could access, with the knowledge you possessed, with the time you were given. It's imperfect, but it's yours. It's incomplete, but it's real. It's vulnerable, but it's standing. The Calusa built in community, but they also built individually, each person depositing their own shells, making their own choices about where to place them, contributing their own experience to the collective structure. The communal mound was made of individual deposits. Both things were true simultaneously. It was shared and it was personal. It was collective and it was individual. It was built together and it was built alone. Your life is like this too. You've built with others. Your mound is connected to their mounds. Your shells mix with theirs. Your foundation touches their foundations. You've built in proximity, in relationship, in community, but you've also built individually. You've placed your own shells according to your own understanding. You've made your own choices about what to deposit and where. You've created your own unique structure, even while participating in the larger communal landscape. This both slash and quality is important. You're not entirely self-made. You didn't build alone. But you're also not entirely community-made. You made choices. You placed shells. You shaped your own mound even while others helped shape it too. Both things are true. You're independent and interdependent, autonomous and connected, individual and communal, all of it simultaneously, all of it contributing to who you've become. You're resting now in the truth of this. You're lying on your mound feeling both alone and accompanied, both separate and connected, both individual and part of something larger. This paradox doesn't need resolution. It simply exists, like you exist, like your mound exists, like the Calusa mounds exist, simultaneously individual structures and parts of a larger cultural landscape. The shells you've deposited are both yours and not yours. They're your experiences, but they're made possible by others. They're your accumulation, but they're built on foundations others laid. They're your mound, but it stands among other mounds in a landscape none of you created alone. Everything is interconnected. Everything influences everything else. The boundaries between your mound and other mounds are visible, but also permeable. Where does your influence end and another's begin? Where does your mound stop and the collective landscape start? The lines blur, the distinctions soften. Everything flows together like shells in a shared tide. You breathe slowly now. You feel your body on the bed. You feel the weight of blankets on top of you, like shells on top of shells, layer upon layer. Accumulation creating warmth, creating protection, creating the conditions for rest. You're buried gently under your own coverings, under your own daily deposits of choosing comfort, of pulling blankets up, of creating conditions for sleep. These small daily choices accumulate too. They build their own kind of mound, their own structure of habit and routine and self-care. The Calusa slept on their mounds. They built their homes on elevated platforms of shell. They rested each night on the accumulation of all the nights before, on all the meals before, on all the gathering before. They literally slept on their own history, on their community's collective past. The foundation of their rest was the foundation of their life. The same substance, the same material, the same shells. You're sleeping on your history too. You're resting on everything you've accumulated, everything you've experienced, everything you've survived, everything you've learned. It's all underneath you right now, supporting you, holding you up, allowing you to rest. Your past isn't separate from your present. Your history isn't disconnected from this moment. It's what you're lying on, what you're supported by, what makes this rest possible. Without your mound, you'd be on the ground, low, vulnerable, exposed to every flood and every danger. But because of your mound, because of everything you've built and accumulated and survived, you're elevated, you're higher, you're safer, you're protected by your own history, by your own accumulation, by your own patient deposit of shells day after day for decades. This elevation is earned. You can feel it. You know the difference between where you are now and where you started. You remember being low, being young, being at ground level with no accumulation yet, no shells beneath you, no history to stand on, no elevated perspective, just starting, just beginning to place your first shells. Now you're high up. You've climbed your own mound. You've risen with each deposit. You've elevated yourself through accumulation, through living, through surviving, through continuing. The view is different from here. The perspective is different. The understanding is different. You can see things you couldn't see when you were lower, when you were younger, when fewer shells had accumulated beneath you. The Calusa who lived on top of the highest mounds could see further than those who lived at ground level. They could see approaching storms. They could see arriving visitors. They could see the broader landscape. Their elevation gave them practical advantages. Warning, perspective, understanding. They could prepare for things others wouldn't notice until it was too late. Your elevation gives you advantages too. You can see storms coming in your life before others can see them in theirs. You recognize patterns. You understand cycles. You know how things tend to develop because you've seen them develop before. Your accumulated experience gives you warning systems that younger people don't have yet. They're still at ground level, still building their first layers, still gaining their first elevations. They can't see what you can see from up here. This is the gift of age, the gift of accumulation, the gift of the mound. You're higher now. You can see further. You understand more. Not because you're smarter or better, but because you've built longer, because you've accumulated more, because you've stood on your own history long enough to gain the perspective that only height provides. You're tired now, really tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying the weight of a whole mound, of a whole life, of decades of deposits and accumulations and experiences. The shells are heavy. The structure is massive. The responsibility of maintaining it, of adding to it, of honoring it is exhausting. You've earned your rest. You've earned this moment of lying down, of allowing the mound to simply exist without adding to it right now, of pausing the construction for the duration of sleep. The Calusa rested too. They paused their building. They slept on the mounds they'd created during the day. They allowed themselves to stop gathering, stop depositing, stop working. They trusted that the mound was enough as it was, that tomorrow would bring more shells, that the work would continue. But tonight, rest was what mattered. Tonight, the mound could simply be, could simply stand, could simply exist without requiring more construction. You can rest too. You can stop building for tonight. You can stop worrying about deposits. Stop thinking about accumulation. Stop planning the next shell. The mound is enough as it is, right now, in this moment. Whatever height you've achieved is sufficient for tonight. Whatever shells you've placed are adequate for today. You can rest on what you've built. You can trust that it will hold you. You can allow yourself to stop and simply be supported by your own accumulation. The world is quiet now. The day's activities have stopped. The gathering has ended. The depositing has paused. The shells are all in their places for tonight. Tomorrow will bring more experiences, more accumulations, more deposits. But tonight is for rest, for integration, for allowing what you've built today to settle into the larger structure, to find its place among all the other shells, to become part of the permanent foundation rather than the active construction. You breathe slowly. You feel your chest rise and fall. Each breath is a tiny tide, coming in, going out, like water over oyster beds, like waves depositing shells, like the eternal rhythm of gathering and releasing, collecting and letting go, building and resting. Your breath knows this rhythm. Your body understands it. Your nervous system follows it naturally, in and out, up and down, gathering and releasing, living and resting. The Calusa lived with this rhythm. They gathered from the water. They returned shells to the earth. They took from abundance and gave back to the landscape. They participated in cycles larger than themselves, larger than their individual lives, larger than their civilization. They were part of the natural rhythm of taking and giving, of consuming and creating, of living and dying, of gathering shells and building mounds and eventually becoming shells themselves, becoming part of someone else's foundation, becoming part of the landscape they'd helped create. You're part of this rhythm too. You've gathered from life. You've deposited shells. You've built your mound. And eventually you'll become part of someone else's foundation. Your children, your community, the landscape of memory and influence and legacy. You'll transition from builder to building material, from accumulator to accumulation, from the one depositing shells to the shell being deposited. This is natural. This is right. This is the cycle continuing. This is how mounds are actually built, from lives lived and completed, from shells emptied and placed, from what was once living becoming part of what endures. But not tonight. Tonight, you're still the builder, still alive, still breathing, still depositing, still adding to the mound, still participating actively rather than passively, still conscious rather than incorporated, still you rather than memory of you. Tonight, you're still here, still present, still experiencing this moment of rest on the mound you've built. This is precious. This is temporary. This is now. So rest now. Let your body relax completely. Let your muscles soften. Let your mind slow. Let your thoughts drift like shells in gentle current. Let everything that doesn't need to be held right now drift away. Let the day dissolve. Let the worries release. Let the plans wait. Let the mound simply be. Let yourself simply rest on what you've built, on what you've accumulated, on what you've survived, on what you've become. The fires die down, the stories settle, and the world grows still. Let your thoughts drift away like embers on the wind. Good night. You've journeyed far through time tonight. Now it's time to journey into dreams. Close your eyes, breathe, and let sleep find you.